Well, here in Britain, still involved in overseas wars, the mainstream media that not long ago criticised doctors for going on strike is suddenly hailing them as heroes. But what about the least well-paid now risking their lives to save Britain from coronavirus? Joining me via Skype from London is Petros Elia, co-founder of United Voices of the World. Thank you so much, Petros, for coming on. There are reports in the papers here that doctors and nurses are being gagged for talking about the shortage of protective equipment. Here in the USA, GE workers are actually going on strike because they want to build ventilators. What about your members when it comes to protective equipment as your members sacrifice their health, arguably, to save us?
Firstly, it's absolutely scandalous that anybody should be gagged from speaking the truth about the government's failure to provide appropriate personal protective equipment to doctors and nurses and other frontline NHS workers. And I would call on all lawyers and trade unions out there to stand up and bring any legal challenge they can against an attempt to gag them for that. There's also obviously the scandal of not having been provided with the PPE in the first place. Our members work on the front line in the NHS, cleaning, portering and catering, and they aren't provided with PPE either. They have very flimsy masks, very flimsy overalls, totally inadequate, and a lot of them are getting really sick. A lot of them are contracting this virus, and unfortunately, many of them in St Mary's Hospital still don't get proper sick pay, and so they simply can't afford to stay at home, which is what they should be doing, and instead they are risking not only their health, but that of other people.
Well, Matt Hancock has been taken ill by coronavirus. The health secretary says there are going to be masks. Boris Johnson, who has coronavirus, says there are going to be masks and protective equipment. Tell me about Percy, a cleaner sacked allegedly for observing social distancing, a member of your union.
Employers all over the country are really showing their true colours in the face of this crisis. So we've seen Wetherspoons that, immediately sacked 40,000 staff on the back of the coronavirus lockdown. But you also get cases like Percy's. He's a cleaner at King's College, a very prestigious, very wealthy university, and he was called into a disciplinary hearing. Now, that disciplinary hearing was going to have 8 people in a room, and this completely contravened the government's social distancing guidelines, Public Health England, the World Health Organization. So Percy rightly stayed away from that hearing, and King's College decided to go ahead in his absence, hold that hearing, and actually they took the decision to dismiss him. Now, this has left Percy in the middle of a pandemic, in the white heat of a pandemic, at risk of destitution. This really speaks to the culture that many low-paid workers are having to work in today. The complete contempt with which employers such as King's University treat their lowest-paid frontline staff, such as Percy.
Well, we obviously invite King's College London, the bosses involved, on the show, but the whole world now knows it's only as safe as the most vulnerable. Tell me about so-called migrant workers, people of colour, disproportionately amongst those who clean and porter the hospitals now at the front lines of the coronavirus. Are they affecting workers of colour more disproportionately?
There's no question about that. If we just take one example, which is Imperial Trust, one of the biggest trusts in the countries, which encompasses 5 hospitals, including St Mary's, which is the biggest one in Paddington in West London. 100% of the cleaners, porters and caterers are, or 99%, are migrant workers from dozens of different countries around the world. Now, they are on the front line. Now, they bravely went on strike last year and forced the trust to make them NHS employees. And as of the 1st of April, they will be NHS employees, which will give them a huge amount of extra protection. We're calling on the government to ensure that every so-called key worker gets at least £15 an hour. There's many key workers that are on as little as £8.21. The minimum wage will increase, but only to £8.71. No key worker in this pandemic deserves less than that.
As you say, at least those workers, or some of them, got recognition as NHS workers rather than being somehow self-employed or on 0 hours. What do you make of the ex-Goldman Sachs banker who is now the finance minister of this country, Rishi Sunak? Because he said he has been responding with massive help for those employed in this country who have lost out because of coronavirus.
There's no doubt that it's an unprecedented stimulus package. He has offered, firstly, only 80% of workers' wages. And in order to be eligible for that money, your employer needs to choose to apply for it. If the government's got the money, the worker should access it directly. The other fact is that this money won't be seen for probably another month. And in the meantime, people have got to try and find a way to make ends meet, which will be extremely difficult for millions of workers. So that hasn't been factored into his coronavirus job retention scheme either. And the fact of the matter is that there are many workers that are sick. They still get statutory sick pay. That's £94.25 per week. Who can live on that?
But it wasn't long ago that people were clapping for the National Health Service. Do you think it's got through to Boris Johnson? There hasn't been anything on sex workers. There hasn't been anything on bus drivers. There hasn't been anything on cleaners, as you said, on porters. Why do you think that is? Do you think they fundamentally don't understand the class dimension to coronavirus?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think they understand. Well, actually, no, I do think they understand it. I just don't think they care. Boris Johnson did say the other day for the first time that he does believe in such a thing as society, which was a rebuttal to Thatcher's claim that there is no such thing as a society. So he's defied his messiah, Maggie Thatcher. But I don't think Boris Johnson will change. I think that his priority is to protect the bosses, is to protect the bankers still. If he really cared about working class communities, migrant communities, BAME communities, he would be ensuring that the minimum wage was raised to at least the level of a real living wage. He would ensure that every worker out there got proper full pay sick pay from day one of illness, rather than the measly statutory sick pay that millions have to try and get by on. He would ensure that universal credit was quicker and easier to access, and that it was at the rate of a living wage. He would ensure that the self-employed, the 5 million self-employed people out there that have to wait until the end of June to get any of the money that he's promised would be getting it sooner through emergency funds. Perhaps he'll go through a bit of an epiphany during his coronavirus recovery, but that's unlikely.
Petros Elia, thank you. We obviously invite the Conservative government, a representative of it, on the programme.